United States authorities are good Marxists, not in favor of the working class, but they think in Marxist terms. They understand that capitalism produces underconsumption, and American capitalism is constantly running the risk of not having enough aggregate demand for its products.
This very idea, EU as a design of the United States, is not very well known in China. For instance, I'm thinking of this with the rise of euro for a time. And many people thought it's the Europeans' identity to show we're different from the United States. We need to have economic autonomy. And some people even say that the very breakout of the war, Kosovo War, was in one way or another the U.S. attempt to destroy the euro. And another thing is the very cause of this war against Iraq, Saddam Hussein, had to do with Saddam Hussein's decision to use euro to sell its oil. So do you think this is a fair assessment, or it's completely wrong from your point of view, as the EU's relations with the United States, more boss and vassal state, this kind of structure? Yeah.
It's an interesting hypothesis. I believe it's more complicated than that. And allow me to explain why is it more complicated. Look, the Americans didn't want to destroy the euro. The Americans were skeptical about the euro. They were saying to Europeans, what are you doing? You want to federate? Federate. But don't federate your money. Because the Americans are, whatever you may say about them, at least they are smart. And they are more practically minded. And they think globally. Germans do not think globally. They were at the time, you see, the German mindset, you have to understand, I appreciate it. They just didn't want to be a global power again because of the trauma of the defeat of Nazi Germany. They wanted one thing. And I think Chinese people understand that. They wanted to be the workshop of Europe. They wanted to make good washing machines and great propellers for your ships here in the shipyards. They wanted to make electronics. They wanted to make pharmaceuticals. They wanted to build things and make money out of that without dominating Europe or the world. That's not a bad thing. The problem is that this means you don't have an understanding of the macroeconomic conditions under which you can do it. You have to, under capitalism, you need to worry about where the demand will come. Because the problem that capitalism has, as Marxism has taught us, is that it produces underconsumption. Now, from 1945, or at least 1949, 1950, all the way to the mid-1970s and beyond, the United States created the conditions for German cars and German pharmaceuticals and German chemicals to have markets. The Germans didn't have to think about it. The Americans were managing global aggregate demand. At some point, especially after 2008, that was no longer the case. And the Germans continued not to care about managing the macroeconomy. They thought that somehow, if they produce good things, good manufactured goods, they will sell magically on the basis of how desirable they are. That's simply not understanding how capitalism works. So the Americans were looking at the euro thinking, this is going to be a problem for you folks. Think about it carefully. I have spoken to, for instance, an interesting conversation I had with Jack Lew, L-E-W. Jack Lew was the finance minister, the US Treasury Secretary of Barack Obama. He was very, very angry with Europeans. Not because they had the euro, but for the same reasons I was angry with Europeans. Because they were practicing austerity for the many while printing money for the many. Now, I was, from a left-wing perspective, angry with what Europe was doing. He was from an American perspective because he understands that a Europe which was imposing austerity on the German working class essentially is pushing American industry to boost its net exports to the United States and therefore to export unemployment to the United States. So the American government was very angry with the European Union. One reason for the Ukraine war, one reason for essentially turning against Europe by Washington, D.C., was that the Americans wanted to teach the Europeans, and particularly the Germans, a lesson. You cannot continue to export unemployment to the United States, but just because you're not doing the right thing by your own people. And now they have won, because now the German government is completely in a state of panic. You mentioned Saddam Hussein. Let me say something about that. I don't believe that the United States invaded Iraq in the first Gulf War because of anything to do with currencies. What happened was, remember, it was 1991. As I was saying before, the difference between the United States authorities and the European authorities is the United States authorities are good Marxists, not in favor of the working class, but they think in Marxist terms. They understand that capitalism produces underconsumption, and American capitalism is constantly running the risk of not having enough aggregate demand for its products, right? So it's essentially Das Kapital turned upside down. How to use Das Kapital against the working classes of the world. But still, it's a Marxist way of thinking about it. So in 1991, the Cold War ended. If you look at the national accounts of the United States up until 1989, the military-industrial complex of the United States, and in particular, the industry that produces ammunition, cruise missiles, Pershing missiles, were accounting for up to 8% of GDP. 8% of national income was accounted for by the production of these weapons. Now, you've got to understand, and I'm sure you do, that Congress, the establishment, is not united. There are some senators that represent the armaments industry, the military-industrial complex. There are other senators who represent the medical establishment, the insurance companies, medical insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies. Now, they didn't want the money to be spent on missiles. They wanted it to be spent on them. Whenever the Pentagon brought to the Senate or to the House a bill saying we need 100 billion more, 200 billion more, 1 trillion more, they were senators who were saying no because they were representing other interests. So it's not a unified thing. While the Cold War lasted, nobody dared in the Senate speak out against the Pentagon budget. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, they did. They said, hang on a second, we no longer have an enemy. Why do we need more missiles? Why do we need more ammunition? So this is my speculative theory, that in 1991, remember there was a major recession in 1991 in America. There is a very strong causal link between the reduction in expenditure on armaments with that recession. And they needed to start spending again. Now, of course, their warehouses were full of ammunition. How do you go to the Senate and say we need more ammunition when you've got so much? You need to spend it. So they invaded Iraq. Not only did they invade Iraq, but remember, Saddam Hussein was working for the United States. He was an ally of the United States. So people forget that Saddam Hussein, like Noriega in Panama, was a stooge of the CIA. He worked on their behalf. He unleashed that cruel war against Iran on behalf of the United States against Ayatollah Khomeini, right? So he was their man. So they decided, okay, we sacrifice him. So they gave him a signal to take Kuwait. And why did he want to take Kuwait? Because the war that he had waged against Iran, on the orders of the United States, had been financed by Kuwait, on the orders of the United States. So the United States has said to Saddam Hussein, invade Iran, and it has said to Kuwait, give Saddam the money. Right? And when that war ended and 1 million people died, the Kuwaitis said, to Saddam, give me the money back. And Saddam picked up the phone and said to Washington, what do you mean? I've done this on your behalf. All these people who have died. And the Americans said, oh, no, we don't care. This is between you, bilateral problem that you have with Kuwait. So he gets really cross. And he thinks, Kuwait is a pipsqueak thing like that. I'll take it. And the Americans, through the American ambassador in Kuwait, signaled to Saddam on purpose, provoking him. They said, the United States will not have a problem if you take Kuwait. So he takes Kuwait. And then, bang! And if this is all established fact, after the surrender of Saddam Hussein during the first Gulf War, the American Air Force was shooting Pershing and cruise missiles and all sorts of missiles into the desert to get rid of the stock so they could replenish it. At some point, Saddam Hussein gets really annoyed and says, I'm going to redenominate the Iraqi oil in euros. And that's when the Americans decided, okay, we'll take him out. So you're right, but there is a longer story which connects to the question of the crisis of American capitalism, European capitalism, and how this all interconnects.
姐妹们总烦恼脸上细纹、干燥与暗沉，现在起跟我一起放心交给 KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹系列，它添加5种 EGF， 专门防止肌肤老化，强化皮肤修复，增加肌肤弹性水嫩，轻松抚平皱纹，换回青春自信。KS Royal Face 皇家颜值逆时奇迹，护肤露、全效精华、精华霜，即刻启动冻龄密码。